After some time, they were told that dinner was served, and the table gradually began to fill with appetizers and hot dishes from different cuisines. Having cut off a piece under the excited look of the waiter, the Duke's bride thought that it looked good and also smelled very interesting. All three guests fell silent to try out what kind of food the local visitors were being fed, and their spoons and forks began to clatter. The pink-haired girl covered her face with her hands, choking and trying not to spit it out, and Angela didn't even try to hide her reaction. As if still holding on to hope, the young man asked if it was really that bad, and the blue-faced maid asked if he was serious. Suddenly, there was a loud stomping and a sharp bang from the door colliding with the wall as a crowd of creatures from another race burst into the restaurant. They all looked alike. Their hard skin was earth gray in color, their ears stuck out comically, and their fangs were very natural. Turning to Luna, Aurora, with the excitement that was understandable at the first encounter with such creatures, asked why the orcs were here. Unable to hide her excitement, and it seemed shame, Luna hastily replied that they were in fact the establishment's most frequent customers. Meanwhile, the big guys went to their tables and started knocking on the wood, declaring that they were hungry and were already waiting for everything to be brought to them. Without sparing the waiters and cooks, the orcs demanded even more food and knocked on the tables when they did not immediately receive the bill or a new dish. Watching this whole scene and listening to the hubbub, the pink-haired girl couldn't understand why the restaurant was in the red zone if it was full of customers. The woman swallowed nervously and nodded when Lady Aurora thoughtfully asked if she could show her the ledger. Returning sometime later, the manager handed the future Duchess an impressive-sized book with a black cover. Doing the calculations in her mind, the girl realized that these records and documents didn't add up at all, and it wasn't even clear how they had calculated it. Audrey began to slowly turn over the pages of the report book, muttering that the numbers were a complete mess and she couldn't understand anything. Oscar apologized to the lady, explaining that they were all inexperienced in this area and had not been trained by anyone, so it was difficult for them to cope with everything. Looking at the woman, the Baroness thought that she was clearly lying because she was smart and simply could not fail to cope with such a relatively easy task. Aurora glanced back at the guild member, thinking that judging by Luna's silence and lack of surprise, she was also involved in this lie. Deciding that she needed to see everything with her own eyes, the pink-haired girl stood up and asked to be taken to the kitchen, confidently walking ahead of the manager. The woman said that it was dangerous and dirty there, and that such a lady should not go there, but the future Duchess said that she would be fine. Entering the kitchen, the girl introduced herself to all the workers, saying that she just decided to drop in on them, but they could be doing their own thing. Walking around the spacious room, the Baroness still did not understand what was happening, thinking that for now everything was quite hygienic. She looked at the empty shelves and said that she had just received a food delivery today, asking why there was so little of everything there then. One of the waiters mumbled and blurted out something unintelligible, trying to justify himself, while Aurora said that even with such an influx of customers, this was impossible. Turning to the young man and pointing to the empty boxes, the lady asked where it all went, while the boy was speechless. Oscar came a little closer to the lady and became gloomy, like a real thundercloud, and said as if she thought that was enough. The woman suddenly rudely declared that even if Miss continued to dig, she would not find anything, and Audrey stared at her in confusion, but silently. The manager seemed clearly quite nervous and agitated when the future Duchess asked if they really had anything to hide. When she replied that this was absolutely not the case, the Baroness folded her arms across her chest and hugged the report book to herself, thinking about what was happening. Her eyes narrowed, scanning everyone present, but it seemed like no one was going to tell her even a fraction of the truth. Oscar stubbornly maintained her silence, even when the guests slowly asked if they would finally tell her where the food went. There was suddenly a noise behind him, and a waiter ran up to the back door leading to the street, hastening to apologize, but it was clearly not he who made the sound. Turning around, Aurora asked if there was anyone outside, and the young man waved his hands, answering that there could be no one there at all. The girl stepped in and said that the harder they tried to hide it, the worse it would get, and pushed on the heavy doors. She froze in surprise when she saw a lot of people in the courtyard of the establishment, clearly not the richest, just ordinary peasants. Slowly putting all the facts together in her head, Audrey asked if they were losing profits because they were feeding poor people, and she agreed. The Baroness exhaled loudly and rubbed her face with her hands, mentally cursing Geoffrey, who probably knew everything for a long time and specially sent her here. Looking now at the poor and hungry people, now at the restaurant staff who were silent and ashamed of their actions, She did not know what to do. Remembering the satisfied face of her fiancé, the pink-haired girl thought that she would like to see how he was messing around here, because he was not going to listen to her. Although she was surprised that the Duke allowed his people to do such good deeds and feign ignorance, it was now unclear what to do. Oscar apologized for keeping her in the dark, but asked her to pretend nothing happened so she could continue to help people. Ignoring these words, the Baroness turned to the guild member and asked if she knew about everything, and Luna also apologized to her. The girl explained that before they opened this place in such an area, orcs attacked people and constantly stole their food. Luna added that they had no choice, but Aurora asked why they had to do it secretly and cover up the charity. The girl muttered that the Emperor did not approve of charity projects, and the people at the top always turned a blind eye to their suffering. She immediately remembered whose fiancé she was talking to and corrected him that they didn't want that, but Aurora said that she was absolutely right. The pink-haired girl let out a sigh and said that now that everything was clear, they could finally begin to properly solve the problem. Oscar nodded when the lady asked if these people had been starving on the streets since she and her companions arrived. Taking the plate with the dish, the girl went out the door, while the poor people began to whisper that they had never seen her. When a little girl stepped towards her, the Baroness sat down next to her and asked if it was true that they had come here for lunch, and she agreed. The little girl, whose face was a little dirty and whose clothes were old and worn, smiled when she heard that this was her portion. The people looked in surprise at the unfamiliar milady, who asked them all to come too and take their share of food for lunch. Taking a black apron from a chair upon returning, the girl said that she did not know who they took her for, but she was not one to turn away the hungry. Oscar listened in surprise as the Baroness asked them to remember that she had come here for a specific purpose and simply wanted cooperation. In response to the workers' quiet questions, Aurora stated that they needed to increase their profit margins and tied her apron behind her back. Raising her index finger, the girl said she would repeat it again, adding that she had no plans to stop this charity work. She turned to the red-haired baby and called out to him, and he hesitantly stepped forward, but approached the lady and answered her call. Audrey asked to bring the vegetables he had brought here earlier, explaining that he had complained about them, but they were just ordinary green onions. The red-haired boy brought a bowl of fresh green onions and asked if she meant this, since none of them knew what it was for. The girl said that you can mix them with a few additional ingredients and then fry them in a pan. Supporting her words with visual accompaniment, the Baroness added that this makes amazing seafood pancakes. The boy echoed the lady's words in surprise and asked if this ordinary grass could really be eaten. As the cooking in the kitchen got into full swing, the orcs began to look up from their food and sniff at the new smell, which was even better. Banging on the tables and other furniture, they screamed and began to growl that the smell was very tasty, and they urgently wanted to eat what they had prepared. Holding plates with those same pancakes in his hands, the waiter announced with a smile that this dish would be a completely new item on their menu. Handing the orcs the plates, the young man said they could try a sample before ordering, and the monster asked in confusion how. They all appreciated the treats that were brought, because although they were not very picky, they were able to distinguish the taste of the food that was brought to them. The monsters shouted in unison that they wanted to order this delicacy, and chaos reigned in the hall again from the noise they made. The waiters looked at each other with bright smiles and hurried to the kitchen to inform Milady Aurora and the other cooks about this. The man's taste seemed to sparkle with new colors, and all its inhabitants already had a premonition that the establishment's profits would increase. After some time, the Duke ordered Wendell to call a tailor to prepare a completely new wardrobe for his bride. Explaining his actions, he thoughtfully said that when he first saw the Baron's daughter, he noticed that she took almost nothing with her. The adjutant suggested that he could call him tomorrow. The blond man shook his head and said that it needed to be done now. Jeffrey stopped writing on the paperwork when he heard that the assistant would be happy to do so, but the lady would not be able to come to the fitting. Ettica removed the reading glasses he used from his face as he moved his fountain pen away from the paper and asked why this was happening all of a sudden. The young man reminded her that Miss Audrey was simply not in the palace, since his lordship himself had instructed her to deal with the low profits at the guild restaurant. The blond man said that it was a few days ago, suggesting that it might be that the girl was injured and could not return. Wendell shook his head and with a calm smile disagreed, stating that, "My lady, she was actually feeling quite well." Aurora was cooking at the same time and said that there were probably other ingredients that they didn't know about, and they should all take it. She taught that if you tell a supplier that you will take a product from him that he cannot sell, you can get the products at a discount or for free. Oscar added that green onions grow wild on the plain nearby. No one cares about them, and the land belongs to the Duke. The pink-haired girl nodded and suggested sending people there to collect onions, and they could turn this land into a real field. The woman agreed, and a waitress ran into the kitchen, saying that there were more and more orders, and they needed workers to keep up with the customers. Leaving the saucepan on the table, Aurora turned around and announced that she would go into the hall, because the cooks had already been trained in her new, interesting recipes. The girl hurried into the hall and took a couple of steps towards one of the orcs, apologizing for the wait and asking what he would like to order. Smiling at how cute the girl was that came out to him, the monster seemed a little silly, asking what about the human lady. The pink-haired girl smiled nervously and said that there was no human lady on the menu, then asked him to choose something else while the waiter admired her. He only managed to say with a smile that the new manager was terribly good, when suddenly he saw a familiar, stern, and gloomy face in front of him. The guy stepped back and greeted his lordship, who looked around the room and frowned and asked what was going on here. He explained that it was all down to their new manager, who had come up with a new dish that had already become a real hit in the restaurant. Jeffrey, who clearly did not like the male admiration of his lady, interrupted the waiter mid-sentence and declared that this was enough. The man clearly asked sternly and displeasedly why his bride was working with them in this ridiculous place and accepting orders from an orc. Without taking his eyes off the representative of another race, who seemed to be in awe of the young girl, the Duke ordered him to answer. The waiter tapped his fingers awkwardly together and explained that they were short of hands and my lady had volunteered to help in the room. Meanwhile, Aurora tried to get rid of the idiot, declaring that she didn't like orc men, and therefore she asked him to stop. Hearing a familiar voice, the pink-haired girl added that, in addition, she had a fiancé, and then turned around, and her guess was easily confirmed. She looked at the displeased face of her fake fiancé, and then muttered that when you remember the devil, he appears. Afterwards, the girl said that at this rate they would be in the black, and so that the orcs would not get tired of this food, they would release a new menu every month. The Baroness said they had received good feedback on the savory pancakes, and everyone also loved the noodle soup and the trusty pork. Jeffrey said that she shouldn't have gone so deep, because as his fiancée, she shouldn't take things so seriously. Putting down her mug, Aurora said that she was making efforts to make a profit, as he had requested, asking if there were any problems with that. The blonde hid his smirk behind his cup as he watched the girl's tirade when she said that if he wasn't happy with something, he could say so. Audrey fell silent, listening to him say that the result surprised him and even made him wonder who he had chosen for himself, a bride or an employee. When the pink-haired girl asked if it was a compliment, Ettica replied that in part it probably was, but that was not what he wanted from her. The cafe workers quietly overheard the Duke's words that he wanted and expected the bride to be a little less proactive in her actions. Cursing silently, Aurora asked if she had passed the test, asking if it gave her the right to express her opinion. Jeffrey agreed and shook his head several times, saying that that was exactly the case, but the girl was most likely just lucky here. Getting up from his seat and pushing his chair back, the fair-haired man said that if she was finished here, then they could go to the palace together. When the girl asked whether they would leave together, the man asked why not, since they were, after all, engaged and had the right to do so. Aurora, following her fiancé with a displeased expression, hissed that she had simply asked, and the Duke shrugged, indifferently noting that he had simply answered. Luna and Oscar both said in one voice that Mistress Aurora had taken excellent care of the place, and bright smiles blossomed on their faces because it was true. Not understanding why they were glowing with such happiness, the girl mentally asked them not to spread rumors, but out loud, she only said that she would go home. Luna raised her thumb and wished the lady to have fun with his lordship, while the waitresses talked about how romantic it all was. Smiling nervously, the girl said that she would definitely return tomorrow, but Jeffrey suddenly calmly and categorically declared that he would not return. The pink-haired girl asked why he said that, and the Duke explained that it was enough to test her abilities. When Audrey said there were still things to be done, Luna said they would send reports, and there was no need for her to come. The women advised the lady to simply come whenever she wanted to visit them, and assured her that everything was fine. Smiling, Aurora said that in that case they would see each other next time, and Oscar asked the lady to take better care of herself. Already on the street, near the Duke's vehicle, the girl shook her head and asked where the carriage in which she had arrived here was. Extending his palm towards his bride, the fair-haired man explained in a measured tone that he had sent her back along with the girl's maid. The Baroness remembered that she had indeed not seen Angela for a long time and wondered if she had simply left without telling her anything. Slightly distracted by this, the pink-haired girl gently lowered her thin fingers into the hand of the man who wanted to help her get into the carriage. Already on the way, she said that she did not expect charity from him, and Jeffrey asked if he really heard a compliment. When Aurora added that she was impressed by how much he cared about people, the Duke stated that none of this happened out of the kindness of his heart. The blonde man explained that if racial hatred increased, a new war would start, so he was simply managing the possible threat. Ettica said that he really didn't care about the restaurant's losses, and the girl asked why he had come today. The man said he was curious about her, adding that he thought she would be useless, but she didn't give up that easily. Feeling angry, Aurora asked if she could hit him once, and the blonde man said that the interview offers were still open. Jeffrey rubbed his fingers under his chin and then smirked, looking at his bride and asking why they didn't give it a try. Unable to contain her bright blush, the girl looked at him with irritation and thought that this smile was deadly, and damn him. She immediately cleared her throat and turned around, folding her arms across her chest, and then stated that it was simply a rhetorical question that did not require an answer. Looking at her so-called fiancé, who had turned away, looking out the window, the girl wondered if all this could really turn him on. Jeffrey said that he needed to tell the girl something, and she looked at him with interest, asking what exactly she needed to know. The fair-haired man said that he would be leaving the castle for a short time, and during his absence, she did not need to leave the property, but only stay there. When he added that they would be able to talk about it upon their return, Aurora frowned and asked if he was holding her hostage. Ettica waved his hand indifferently and stated that if she found it much more convenient to consider their pastime this way, then he would agree. Not wanting to be appeased just like that, the girl asked with interest whether his affairs were connected with the recent rise in racial tensions. After nodding his head in agreement several times, the blonde man stated that all of these matters were related to the guild, and he would leave all of this for later. Looking at the girl's worried face, the Duke found her eyes with his gaze and said that she need not worry, because he would not stay long. 3 weeks later, Aurora was ready to climb the walls from boredom, listening without initiative that the orcs were delighted with pancakes with sweet filling. Angela added that they had been lining up since the morning, chanting the name of the pancakes, and the future Duchess turned around. Thinking about how orcs loved sweets, the pink-haired girl wondered if she should come up with more desserts with honeycomb or something else. Her personal maid couldn't stop chewing on her cookies, and through her endless chomping, she said that she had heard something on the way here. Aurora slammed the thick stacks of restaurant reports down on the table and winced when she heard that the Duke had long since returned. Already flying out of the room so quickly that the paper flew away after her, the girl stated what she should have said earlier, and Angela waved at her. Audrey thought angrily that she had spent all this time locked up out of ignorance, and the Duke was obliged to say that he returned immediately after his arrival. As she ran quickly down the hallway, Wendell appeared in front of her, carrying some papers in his hands and greeting her with a smile. The young man said that he was just about to visit the girl and asked where she was going, and the Baroness growled that she was going to his boss. Frightening his lordship's adjutant, the pink-haired girl pounded on the heavy wooden door with both fists, calling out to the Duke with a shout. Having blocked the chambers of his superior, the young man desperately turned to Madame Aurora and, stuttering, said that she should not do this. The fair-haired man sat in the semi-darkness, covering his face with his palms and hearing a conversation behind the door about how he was in his room, but now was not the best time. With her arms folded across her chest, Aurora asked why he couldn't let her in to see her fiancé and asked if they were hiding anything. Jeffrey threw open the door and found himself right in front of the fragile girl, loudly declaring with irritation that he had asked not to be disturbed. Audrey was a little scared when she saw him in front of her in such a state, and her eyes, like a star map, opened wide. Already surprised, the pink-haired girl saw her fiancé in front of her, whose eyes suddenly changed their usual color to bright red. As soon as he blinked, the color changed back to a dull gray, and Aurora looked at him in surprise, hearing the question of what happened. The girl folded her arms across her chest and said that she had come to remind him of his words, that he had promised to listen to her as soon as he returned from his trip. Behind the gentleman stood an adjutant, who watched with excitement how such bold behavior would turn out for the lady. Once in the office, Audrey asked him if he was feeling unwell, but the man rubbed his face with his hand and said that it shouldn't bother her. Pulling his glasses up onto his nose, he said that the girl had chosen the worst possible day to drop in, but he would still keep his promise. Once again, unable to hide the bright blush on her cheeks, Aurora cursed mentally and thought that the glasses suited him terribly well. Turning around, the blonde man addressed Wendell in a tired tone so that he wouldn't stand there like a pillar, and the boy seemed to wake up from his trance. The adjutant reached the future Duchess in a few steps and handed her a large folder, causing her to ask in surprise what it was. The guy explained that starting next week, the lady would be receiving lessons in culture and etiquette to prepare her for life in high society. Pointing out one of the points, Aurora asked why the engagement party was happening so soon, asking if a month was enough. When the blonde man responded with consent, the girl looked up and asked if, in that case, it would really just be a small meeting. Straightening his broad shoulders, Jeffrey immediately objected to the bride and declared with a smile that this event would be extravagant beyond belief. Turning page after page, she said that all the details looked great, and the man noted that this was a somewhat sluggish reaction. Aurora looked up and blew a stray lock of hair from her forehead, questioning what exactly he expected from her after this news. Ettica said he had heard that most ladies dreamed of a lavish engagement, but now he guessed that she was not one of them. Looking at the man, the Baroness said with a grin that this is what happens when you marry for profit and not for love, and the Duke thought about it. Audrey said she didn't care, but the more colorful they made it, the better, noting that he couldn't act like he was in love. She suggested that he could translate all his love into monetary equivalent and equivalent gifts, which would please everyone around him. Pointing her finger at him, the girl stated that this would be a much more effective performance, and the blonde man agreed with her. Aurora asked if this party would be her debut in high society, and the Duke agreed, then helped her turn the page and point somewhere. The pink-haired girl opened her mouth when she heard that, since the rumors about them had spread quite far, she needed to fill out this page. The adjutant explained to the lady that they had invented a story about the Duke's mad love during a business trip to the East. According to the script, Ettica couldn't get this girl out of his head, and so he arranged that very interview so that it would bring them together again. Then, according to the plot, there was a fateful reunion with the woman of his dreams, and this would clearly be considered very romantic among aristocrats. Rubbing his nose with his fingers, the young man noted that the person who came up with this was a genius, and the girl asked half-heartedly if they would really believe it. She listened with a gloomy face and disbelief that this was very plausible, and some would even add their own details to this story. Stopping reading the heart-wrenching love story, Aurora looked up and asked if Jeffrey was confident, and he asked about what exactly. The girl meant the game of love, and the blonde man asked if money could buy happiness. Why couldn't it buy love? The man asked if she was convinced of this, and Audrey muttered that, to be honest, she still couldn't understand it. Changing a bad guy like the Duke just for love seemed like a common popular cliché from books and movies. Aurora immediately remembered how she bought that very book in her past life, talking with a young man about whether the genre was important. She no longer remembered whether there was any romance in that book at all, and then asked if those were all the things the Duke wanted to discuss with her. Shaking his head thoughtfully, the blonde man stated that, in fact, there was one more part of this conversation that did not need to be postponed. Audrey listened silently, as the man knew that his fiancée was still working at the restaurant that belonged to the Ettica Guild. When the Duke stated that the reports were a good thing, but she did not need to go there, the girl asked in surprise why exactly. After carefully examining the girl, Jeffrey calmly said that this was not the place she needed to be, and that it was indeed dangerous. He added that the situation at the border was somewhat unstable, and although everything had been fine recently, the restaurant was not in a safe place. The man said he didn't want to appear like a careless groom, and his bride could go somewhere else, but he would assign a security guard to her. Summoning all the patience she had, the pink-haired girl listened to him carefully and agreed, not seeing anything special in it. Ettica pulled off his glasses and slammed them down on the table, declaring that that was all, and that she could now calmly return to her room. Without turning around to look at his interlocutors, the Duke looked at his table and muttered that he was simply very tired and had had enough discussions for today. A little later, Angela noticed that the girl was not enthusiastic about the lessons, and she replied that she was not sure she could handle such a schedule. She rose from her seat and looked at her personal maid, tearing herself away from her unimpressive schedule. Aurora muttered that she really didn't want to be punished, and the blue-eyed maid clarified what she meant by punishment. The pink-haired girl said that when she had lessons, if she even once clinked a cup, the etiquette teacher would pinch her. The maid asked if that was not how she was punished, and Audrey confirmed that it was every time she made a mistake. Smiling nervously, the girl asked if not everyone here studied like that, and her maid shook her head. Angela suddenly asked if the lady's words about her losing her memory were true, and she answered in the affirmative, looking at her. The future Duchess froze and even became a little frightened when she heard her ask if she was sure that this did not happen due to the family's fault. The dark-haired woman said that it was very strange to send her daughter, who was not in her right mind, to marry a duke instead of a hospice after losing her memory. When Angela added that she felt she was being mistreated and that it was suspicious, Aurora tried to laugh it off and added that she was fine. The maid sighed and moved away. She clearly seemed dissatisfied and even thoughtful, although usually she was only concerned with food. The girl muttered that it was the first time she had heard of punishment given during lessons, and folded her arms over her chest, muttering that she should have been there. The pink-haired girl asked what she would do, and Angela said she would leave the food for thought on that to her mistress's imagination. The Baroness thought she was not sure if she could speak of harsh treatment, but there was certainly favoritism towards the daughters. She started to talk about her sister, but then fell silent and buried her face in her elbow, trying to remember whether her name was Julia or whether she had remembered it incorrectly. Such knowledge of her new relative was explained by the lack of communication between them. Aurora had never even seen her face. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and then the Duke's adjutant asked for forgiveness from Madame Aurora, and the girls turned to look at him. She sighed and asked if Wendell wanted anything, and he replied that her teacher, Countess Rosamond, had already arrived at his lordship's castle. The young man said that he thought it would be nice to get to know her beforehand, and the girl began to get out of bed, thanking him. The Countess, a woman with a stunning posture and dark hair that was pulled back into a strict hairstyle, was already waiting in one of the rooms of the palace. As she walked inside, the girl apologized for the intrusion and introduced herself by her first and last name, asking whether the woman was a teacher. She quickly turned around and looked at her new student, but the gloomy expression on her wrinkled face did not seem friendly. A little later, the pink-haired girl fell onto the bed and frantically pounded it with her fists, declaring that she was in shit, and Angela disciplined her. Her entire day was scheduled. The dance lesson lasted 3 hours, and at noon the culture lesson began, which also lasted for 3 hours. In the evening, during an equally long history lesson, the teacher explained to her the history of tea leaves, and she just thought about how much she wanted to sleep. Hearing another chomping sound from her maid, the Baroness rose from her bed and muttered that she would do well to have something to eat. She felt like she was in a women's boot camp and gratefully accepted the candy from her maid. Angela asked if these teachers were punishing her, and Aurora countered that they were very nice and impressed with her quick adaptation. The history teacher and the lady who taught dancing were equally effusive in their admiration for the success of the Duke's bride. The girl even enjoyed the constant praise, but when she was asked to increase the pace, she realized that she had dug her own grave. The maid shrugged and said that, as with her work in the restaurant, the lady was at times surprisingly skilled in her various tasks. A little puzzled by the way the words were phrased, Aurora asked if it was a compliment, and the blue-haired girl replied that of course it was. When the maid reminded her about the upcoming culture lesson, the pink-haired girl got up from the bed and, feeling the weight of her head, muttered that she didn't want to. Angela asked why exactly, if something was wrong, and the future Duchess mumbled incoherently that everything was not quite as she would have liked. There seemed to be something strange about Countess Rosamond, although at first she even seemed a little sweet and quite reserved to the girl. The woman exuded nobility, poise, and elegance as she introduced herself as Chelsea Rosamond, who was pleased to meet Aurora. Then the girl put her hand to her chest and bowed to her, expressing respect and declaring that she too was glad of this meeting between them. When Audrey said that it was an honor for her to be a student, the woman suddenly asked if it was paint, and the Baroness did not immediately understand what was being discussed. The girl hesitantly muttered that the hair color was natural when the teacher said that such an appearance did not look natural. Countess Rosamond asked dryly with disbelief whether she was hearing the truth and snapped her red lace fan shut, looking at the new student. Then, Aurora received several rather personal questions that she did not want to answer and could not, due to her position. For 2 days now, the woman had been tirelessly criticizing every feature of the student, and today she declared that her manner of speech was simply terrible. She rudely asked why she had to constantly tell the girl to stop slouching, asking if it was that difficult. The future Duchess would have gladly abandoned her lessons, complaining of unprofessionalism, although she could hardly do so. Wendell had talked so long and so colorfully about her service record that it was clear that it was not easy to recruit such a lady and that she had to be tolerated. Sitting on the beige sofa, the pink-haired girl winced, thinking about what the insanely illogical woman was going to scold her for this time. The dark-haired girl entered the office and asked if the girl would not even greet the guest, grumbling that he was disappointing her more and more.